something for the next guy up. Because there's ways that are established and patterns that are established over one person's ministry tenure. What's that? Oh, yeah, thank you. Well, it's an interesting reality, and it's true, and I think you see it in a lot of churches, especially where there's been a guy that's maybe served for more than 10 years. You typically see that, but new ways come in, new ways of doing things, saying things, leading, and sometimes there's challenges that come along with that. What other things make it difficult when there's leadership transitions? Yeah, Bob. Yeah. Sometimes in transitions, and I do believe that you see this. I've certainly seen this before. There can be a few people in the transition that really desire to have leadership or to be in that role that kind of take that opportunity to kind of push that door open and get their foot in and grab hold of leadership. And so, yeah, that happens sometimes, and then there's disruption when another leader's assigned. Yeah, Dave. Yes. So I'm part of a board currently. When I came on the board, I'm on BlackRock's board. Many of you are familiar with that ministry. When I came on the board at BlackRock, BlackRock had just finished the process of hiring a new executive director. It was a long process, a lengthy process. The longtime executive director had been there for many, many years, and there was a lot of unknowns related to the new executive director coming in. How's he going to lead? What things are going to change? How's this going to work? How's the staff going to receive? And those things can sometimes perpetuate some fear and uncertainty over the direction of the ministry. And so, yeah, there's unknowns as well that can make these transitions difficult. What else? Other realities? Yeah, Ken. Yeah. Yes. It is. Change is really an enormous reality in these transitions because you very rarely are going to find two very similar types of people. It's probably going to be a different personality stepping in, and the way that one leader is trained and taught is different from the way that the new leader coming in has been trained and taught. Sure, there may be some resources that are shared. Certainly in the church, we have one predominant resource that should be shared across all transitions. But every school trains their pastors differently. Every school trains their coaches differently. We see this in sports. Different coaches come out of different systems. Systems do things differently. And so that change can be disruptive sometimes. And there can be upheaval that comes along and follows. Yeah, any other thoughts with leadership transitions and changes? Why they're hard? Yeah, Dan. That really leans into the reality of how change can really affect the constituents. I mean, we see this in churches, we see this in businesses. When a new leader steps in to begin to lead, we often haven't thought about how their leadership personality or how their leadership style might affect the people who they're serving, and how that change might have effect over the entire organization. And so in businesses, sometimes people who have held long positions for long periods of time end up in a different position or a different spot or given a different role or title. And again, that can be hard and unsettling and disruptive to the course of the organization and or the church. So absolutely. We are in a time of transition here in 2 Samuel chapter 3. And we've been tracking this. There has been a transition where Saul has died. He is no longer the king of Israel. And now David is beginning very early on in his leadership. And where we end up today in 2 Samuel chapter 3 is really David's activities after Saul's death. And it's an unraveling, it's the beginning, really, of an unraveling of Saul's complicated legacy. And what we're going to see today is the increase of David's house and his reign over Israel. And so let's jump in, and before we do, let's open in prayer. Lord, we are thankful for this opportunity to gather together and to study your word. Lord, the examples that we are given in the Old Testament are timely and enduring. And Lord, they carry us and refresh us. And we learn from the good of David's leadership, and we learn from the failures of David's leadership. We look at the leadership of Saul over Israel, and we mourn in the failures of it, but we also learn from them. And Lord, above all, we see your goodness and your sovereignty and your faithfulness as you carried your people through a very difficult season as they were transitioning from seeing you as their king to now looking upon a man as their king. And so, Lord, as we enter your text today, help us to see the good and the bad and to learn from both. And we will give you the honor and the glory. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're going to start with chapter 3. We're going to look at verses 1 to 5 of 2 Samuel chapter 3. And really, verse 1 sums up this entire kind of timeline that we've been tracking. Saul's demise and David's rise. Look at what verse 1 says. There was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. And David grew stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. And we've said from the very beginning of this study, one man's fall leads to another man's rise. Now 2 to 5. Sons were born to David at Hebron. His first son was Amnon of Ahinoam of Jezreel. And his second son, Chileab, or in some places he's named Daniel, of Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And the third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. And the fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith. And the fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital. And the sixth, Ithream of Eglah, David's wife. These were born to David in Hebron. Now, apart from the names that David chose for his sons, what is the error that's going on here? And I say that in jest. Some of these names are difficult, but they all have significant Hebrew meaning behind them. But yeah, what is going on? You know, hey, somebody turn to Deuteronomy 17 for me. I think it's a good reminder. This is not good. And here we are, 2 Samuel chapter 3, very early on in David's legacy, and somebody should be waving a bright red flag saying, hold on, David. Deuteronomy chapter 17. Somebody have it? Laura, you have it? Verse 17. Verse 17, yep. Right, that's talking about the king of Israel, not multiplying wives unto himself. Now, my wife is here today. Hi, baby. So I'm going to say this kindly. I have one wife, and that's all I can handle. Yeah. Right. Only the last one said it was his wife. He's multiplying children through women, some of which are not even his wife. But yeah, the Lord, he's given me Sheila. Now I say she's a superhero. She really is. How in the world is David supposed to follow the Lord with all of his heart and take care of all of these women through whom he's having children with? There's no possible way. And there was a reason that law was given. Kings should not be multiplying these women or these wives for themselves, having children by all these other women, because necessarily it's going to become distracting to them. How do you care for all of these people? I mean, and to try to keep up with the ramifications of keeping this one happy and this one happy and this one happy, it's impossible. Larry, you said it. You're wiser than me. I didn't say it. We dance around that carefully. But what we see here, and I think what's identified very early on in this chapter, is that David wasn't perfect either. There's this narrative sometimes that we fall into where Saul was the bad king, David was the good king. Well, we know this. David was a king after God's own heart. That's what the Bible says. But it doesn't say that he was a perfect king who did no wrong. And the first 5 verses here of 2 Samuel chapter 3 are strong and clear evidence that David was not a perfect leader. There are none. Yeah, Rob. Right. Yeah. It's a good question, and I'm not sure, because obviously this was adultery. And yeah, we tend to harp on the incident with Bathsheba, as in that might have been his only pitfall in this area, where this is clear evidence that David had a woman problem. And we see even earlier in 1 Samuel, the writers are always clear to draw out, and in 2 Samuel, how David's wives, they're always described as very beautiful. And so not only did he have an eye for women, but he had this eye for what the Bible described as beautiful women, and I'm not sure why Bathsheba gets all of the focus, probably because that narrative is so drawn out individually, but certainly there's immorality and adultery happening in these other parts of David's leadership. Yeah. Anything else? God allows this to happen, but does God approve of this? No. God does not approve of this kind of behavior. And so the text moves from David and kind of starting off on this shaky footing where he's amassing all these women and having all these children to a reminder of the complicated legacy that was left behind by Saul. Look at verses 6 to 11. So while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, Abner was making himself strong in the house of Saul. So just because one leader has died and moved on doesn't mean that his influence or his house has come to an end. There's still influence. And there's this man named Abner, and we're going to find him to be a strong man in this text. Verse 7. Now Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why have you gone into my father's concubine?" Then Abner was very angry. That's key there. He's offended, strongly offended, and to the point of anger over the words of Ishbosheth, and said, "Am I a dog's head of Judah? To this day, I keep showing steadfast love to the house of Saul, your father, to his brothers, and to his friends, and have not given you into the hand of David. And yet, you charge me today with a fault concerning a woman." Both David and Saul had their women problems. Saul's house continued to. God do so to Abner, and more also, if I do not accomplish for David what the Lord has sworn to him, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah from Dan to Beersheba. And Ishbosheth could not answer Abner another word because he feared him. And so here we have, in this next part of this chapter, you have this strong man, this strong remnant of Saul's house. His name's Abner, and he comes across, he had military acumen. He was a general. I mean, he was a man to be feared. And you have the son of Saul, the last remaining son of Saul, who comes across in these verses as kind of the final bit of Saul's, the legacy of Saul's house. And how is he presented? Just like his father, right? Saul was a man who was motivated by fear. Different from David, right? Ishbosheth is a son who is motivated and can no longer speak because of fear. Fear. And quite honestly, Abner is offended. He's offended. He thinks he's been defending the house of Saul and doing this for the right reasons, and so he gets angry and offended that Ishbosheth would accuse him of sleeping with his father's concubine. And so ancient Near East, back then, if a king died, any woman or wife who was part of his harem was perpetually seen as connected to him until their death, which means they were off limits. So this would have been wrong. This would have been an affront. And so Abner decides that he is going to join up with David. But he does so for the wrong reasons. Why? How's Abner guilty of doing the right thing for the wrong reasons? Yes, it's right for Abner to join up with David. David is the new king. He's going to be on the throne, and Abner's right by coming under his authority. But why is he doing it for the wrong reasons? What's his motivating factor behind all of a sudden now joining up with David? He's angry. Yeah. He's offended. He's offended that Ishbosheth would accuse him of dishonoring one of Saul's concubines. And so for that reason, he's going to do the right thing, but he's going to do it for the wrong reasons. And we can all be guilty of this sometimes, I'm sure. There was a group of leaders in the New Testament who were guilty of this. Can anybody name them? Yeah, Pharisees, religious leaders, Sadducees. They did a lot of the right things for the wrong reasons. And that really is what's going on here. And so look at what happens, starting in verse 12. Abner sent messages to David on his behalf. So Abner's going to come under the rule of David, so he sends messengers to him. To whom does the land belong? Make your covenant with me, and behold, my hand shall be with you to bring over all Israel to you. And he said, good, I'll make a covenant with you, but one thing I require of you, that is, you shall not see my face unless you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see my face. Now, what is the remarkable theme over these first 13 verses? Women! What is going on? All of David's wives, Ishbosheth and Abner getting in an argument over Rizpah, and now Michal. Ladies, you're very powerful. Motivating a lot of behaviors here in this chapter of 2 Samuel chapter 3. They really are. And why does David want Michal? Yeah, Dick. That's right. Yeah. She had been promised, and to the point, I think, where how many foreskins did David have to go and retrieve in order to secure her? That's a pretty big sacrifice. I think David even mentions it in the text here, like 100 foreskins. Okay, if I had to collect 100 foreskins for the price of a woman, I wouldn't want to lose that woman either. And yeah, Dave. Yeah, you're right on it. It's more about love, isn't it? I mean, it's more than just about love. I mean, I'm sure David had feelings for her. I mean, he had feelings for a lot of women. Sure, he had feelings for her too. We don't deny that. But yes, absolutely, there is so much more going on here than just love. This isn't just David being righteous and saying, hey, she belongs to me, I want her back, give her back. There's a lot that's going on here. This is going to solidify his position as a leader, seeming more legitimate. He has the daughter of Saul back in his harem. Absolutely. Yeah. Very good. Look at verse 14. Then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, give me my wife, Michal, for whom I paid the bridal price of 100 foreskins of the Philistines. And Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband, Paltiel, the son of Laish. But her husband went with her, weeping after her, all the way to Berean. Then Abner said to him, go home. Knock it off. Go return. And he returned. And really, we're given further insight here into the character of Abner. Abner's not like a super empathetic and compassionate guy. I mean, here comes the Michal, and she's being brought back to David, and the Bible tells us that her husband is following behind her, mourning, crying. Like, he is really genuinely sad that this is happening. So obviously this was a good relationship to some measure. Now maybe she was like, well, I couldn't wait to get away from that guy. But the Abner, the general, heartless. Go back home. Knock it off. Stop. Making us all look bad. And he sends him back. So this is all going on at the beginning of the leadership transition of David as king of Israel. He's attempting to solidify his throne and his leadership over the people of God. And so the poor husband, who I don't think we're given his name, the poor husband is sent back home. He returns, and watch what Abner gets to do. Look at verses 17 here. Starting in verse 17. Abner conferred with the elders of Israel, saying, for some time past, you've been seeking David as king over you. Now then, bring it about. For the Lord has promised David, saying, by the hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all their enemies. Abner also spoke to Benjamin. And then Abner went to tell David at Hebron all that Israel and the whole house of Benjamin thought good to do. Abner's recruiting here. Look at verse 20. When he came with 20 men to David at Hebron, David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. And Abner said to David, I will arise and go and will gather all Israel to my lord the king, and they may make a covenant with you that you may reign over all that your heart desires. So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. So I think it's really ironic that Abner sends the husband of Michal away, and then he gets to sit at this table and have a feast with David and all these elders and all these leaders. And there's a little bit of recruiting going on, a little bit of scheming. But what I find most interesting is this line right here. In the very beginning of verse 18. Now then, bring it about. You've been wanting this. You've been wanting this. 1 Samuel, all of the book of 1 Samuel. They wanted David as king. Saul was saying, it's time now. Bring it about. Dan. Yeah, I think that was Abraham Lincoln. Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, right? Not a match made in heaven, for sure. Not a match made in heaven. No, Team Arrivals, I believe that was the title of a book. And I think Abraham Lincoln was known for bringing men onto his cabinet that had strong disagreements with him. What was that? Yeah, yeah. So we see maybe a little bit of this going on here. There's a problem, though. And the problem is another failure in David's leadership. And quite honestly, friends, it's a failure that leaders across the world today still struggle with. And it's a failure that can be easily identified, but I think is often unfairly critiqued. David fails to communicate the significance of this to his own people who are already leading with him. And so now there's a little bit of insecurity. There's a little bit of unknown. Who is Abner, and why all of a sudden is this guy in the courts feasting with us? He was on Saul's side. Now all of a sudden he's with us? So David has a guy in his court that's not too excited about this. Look at verse 22. Just then the servants of David arrived with Joab. This is one of David's guys from a raid, bringing much spoil with them. But Abner was not with David at Hebron, for he had sent him away and he had gone in peace. When Joab and all of the army that was with him came, it was told Joab that Abner the son of Ner came to the king, and that he has let him go, and he has gone in peace. Then Joab went to the king and said, "What have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Why is it that you have sent him away so that he is gone?" By the way, why is Joab so upset about Abner? He's looking out for David. One, yeah. He's saying, hey, this guy could be a sneak, right? Why else? There's some real personal reasons here. Yeah, Bob. He killed a brother. Abner killed Joab's brother. Joab, one of David's generals, comes back and has heard now that David has been friendly with the murderer of his brother and sent him away in peace. This is why we're saying communication, right? How could communication have helped to resolve this mess? I mean, it would have been really nice for David to consider how this would have looked to Joab, wouldn't have it? Hey, I mean, it doesn't take a little bit to send a messenger out and say, hey, Joab, I want you to know as you're coming back, Abner came, we met, here's what's going on. He's not a threat to your position. You're still my guy. I just want to talk with him, hear him out. He brought Michal back to me. It's all good. But Joab kind of blindsided here. And we can all relate with Joab. Maybe some of you have maybe even seen this before in leadership in places that you've been, where a leader has met with somebody that you think is, whoo, that guy's up to no good. And now you're starting to question why that leader met with him and all these other things. And that's kind of what's going on here. Joab is not happy. And as one of David's generals, he's protecting his king, just like David protected Saul, right? I mean, even though Saul was trying to take his life, Joab cared about protecting David, keeping him safe. So there's an issue here. Go to verse 25. You know that Abner, the son of Ner, came to deceive you, and to know you're going out and you're coming in, and to know all that you are doing. He's a spy. Why are you trusting this guy? He doesn't have your best interest in mind. He's being sneaky. So Joab takes matters into his own hands, and we've talked about this before in our study of 1 Samuel. When leaders take matters into their own hands, oftentimes this is where leaders find themselves in the most trouble and in the most difficult of situations. And that's what Joab's going to do. Look at verse 26. When Joab came out from David's presence, he sent messengers after Abner. He's a very smart man. And they brought him back from the cistern of Sirah, but David did not know about it. So they go and they get Abner and they bring him back. And look what happens. And when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into the midst of the gate to speak with him privately, and there he struck him in the stomach so that he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother. Notice what Joab did there. He takes him outside of the gate so he doesn't kill him inside of the city, where it would have been against laws and all those other things. This is very strategic. This is premeditated. And in some ways, if you're familiar with the book of Judges, it reminds me of the death of Eglon. Remember? Eglon was in the potty up on the ceiling of his house, and, I can't remember the name of the guy now who snuck in. Who's got it? Anybody got the name? Ehud, yeah. Ehud sneaks in, right into the stomach. That's true. The fat closed in around it did not come out. You're right, Rob. Very interesting detail in that story. Yeah. Here's another stabbing in the stomach. And Abner's dead. Now, how might David respond? I love that, I believe chapter 1, Pastor Bob covered it last week, opens with David mourning and lamenting Saul and Jonathan. David's doing a lot of lamenting early on in his leadership, is he not? Instead of celebrating that Saul's dead, he's mourning over it. Instead of being happy that he's now king, he's sad that his best friend Jonathan's been murdered. And now, Abner, afterward, when David heard of it, verse 28, he said, I and my kingdom are forever guiltless before the Lord for the blood of Abner and the son of Ur. May it fall upon the head of Joab and upon all of his father's house, and may the house of Joab never be without one who has a discharge, or who is leprous, or who holds a spindle, or falls by the sword, or who lacks bread. So Joab and Abishai his brother killed Abner, because he had put their brother Asahel to death in the battle at Gibeon. And then David mourns Abner. Sackcloth and ashes, everything. They buried Abner at Hebron. The king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner. And all the people wept. And the king lamented, saying, should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. As one falls before the wicked, you have fallen. And all the people wept again over him. Joab gets a slap on the wrist. When I was reading this early in the week, I hadn't read it for a while, and honestly, I anticipated that David would have killed. I'd forgotten that he did not kill Joab, or have Joab killed. But it kind of makes sense. Joab's one of his military leaders, and he's trying to establish his kingdom. Joab probably had a lot of men who were loyal to him, and Joab did something that in a lot of those men's eyes would have seemed very wise. So having Joab murdered or killed or executed for this probably would not have been the smartest move on David's behalf. And so Joab gets the proverbial slap on the wrist, but David does put a strong curse over Joab's house. It's very interesting what he says. Leprosy and all those other things. Any thoughts or comments about that? Anything stick out to you in observation? Yeah, Mick. Supposed to be. That's right. Which is why he had to go outside the gate. Yeah. It was a city of refuge. You weren't allowed to do that in there. Yeah. he took him outside of the city and killed him outside of the gate so that he would not be killed in the city of refuge. Yeah, because you're right. Anyone was supposed to be able to live in there without fear of life. Yeah. Yeah. It's good. Anything else? So look at what happens. Verse 35. All the people come to persuade David to eat bread while it was yet day. But David swore, saying, God, do so to me and more also, if I taste bread or anything else till the sun goes down. And all the people took notice of it, and it pleased them, as everything that the king did pleased all the people. Isn't that interesting? That David didn't have Joab killed, and that he mourned over the death of who many would have perceived to be his enemy. It pleased the people because it really exposed and revealed the heart of David to them. Did it not? And boy, doesn't it add so much significance and meaning to love thy enemies? Pray for those who persecute you. Boy, David's a good example of that, if not with Saul, here with Abner as well. Do you have something, Larry? Just agreeing, yeah. Yeah. And the king said to his servants, verse 38, do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? And I was gentle today, though anointed king. These men, the sons of Zeruiah, are more severe than I. The Lord repay the evildoer according to his wickedness. David was gentle. He was merciful. And the people appreciated that, loved that, respected that. He was different than Saul, a breath of fresh air. He could mourn when his perceived enemies were killed or fell before him. He could honor men who would have at one time fought against him, battled against him. Abner could have led search parties out to take the life of David, and now here he was saying that he is a prince and a great man. What a lesson, what a message to be able to say that of our enemies. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Yep. Any closing thoughts or comments before we invite Mike to come up and lead us in our prayer time today? So what starts out at the beginning, yeah, Chuck. Right? Yeah, he's just doing what his dad did in some ways. Yeah. And I think what's ironic about this chapter as we conclude is what starts out as kind of a great moral failure at the beginning of chapter 3 in verses 1 to 5 is turned around by the end of chapter 3 into something that the people are looking at the king and saying, look at that guy's heart. Look at who he is. He can mourn and lament over his enemies. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Mike.